is accessible to This meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Microphones or telephones will be used by all speakers. Large print materials are available upon advance request. If you would like either of these accommodations, please contact Mary Waldron at 508-583-1833. The notice of non-discrimination rights and protections to beneficiaries with regard to the federal Title VI/non-discrimination protections and the state non-discrimination protections is posted in this meeting room and is available on the Ocolony Planning Council website. Please contact Mary Waldron at 508-583-1833 for more information. Thank you and welcome. And I'd like to call the meeting to order. And Bill, if you wouldn't mind, would you do the roll call, please?
Yes, ma'am. Is it Abington?
John Stone's here.
Thank you, John. Avon? Bridgewater?
Michael Dutton's here.
Welcome, Michael. Brockton? Duxbury? East Bridgewater? Easton?
Dave Field.
Thank you, Dave. Welcome. Halifax? Hanover? Hanson?
Don Howard's here.
Welcome, Don. Thank you. Kingston? Pembroke? Plymouth? Wow. Plimpton? Stoughton? West Bridgewater? And both our chair and vice chair are here from Whitman.
Thank you. Yeah, we're here.
Thank you.
Bill, what are our numbers for people present? For
Uh,
the delegates? Are we okay?
yeah, I believe we're okay. Yep.
Michael and Glenn are here from BAT as well.
Okay,
I was gonna
great.
say, this is about
think
Brockton Area
Abington-
Trans. Thank you.
Yeah, I think Abington showed up. Bruce, are you an alternate?
John,
You're an
John's
alternate.
here.
Okay, okay,
John from Abington's here.
okay.
Yeah, and about MassDOT District 5.
All right, okay. Okay, I gotta move. Thank you so much, Bill. Appreciate it.
Okay.
I'm gonna move on to item number 2, which is public comments. Hearing none, I'm gonna move on to item number 3, which is the minutes of the August 4th, 2022 meeting. Do I have any corrections? Do I have any motions on the floor for acceptance?
I'll make a motion, Dan from Whitman. to
Do I have a
accept.
second on that?
I'll second it.
Okay, Don, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion carries. I'm gonna move on to item 7A, which is under new business, which is the South Shore 2030 infrastructure priorities for sustainable growth. Today, our guest speakers are Peter Foreman. He's the president and the CEO of South Shore Chamber of Commerce, and Janice Bergeron, who is the co-chair of the SSCC Transportation Advisory Group. Welcome, Peter and Janice. Thanks for joining us today. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having us. Let me kind of give you a preview for those of you who aren't familiar with it, with our 2030 economic plan, something we started at the Chamber about 7 years ago, looking at regional competitiveness. One of the major takeaways we had from that economic data was that the region's economy was threatened largely by demographics, being an aging region of the state. We knew that we were going to be losing workforce, and that was going to make it harder to attract businesses. And we also knew that some of our major employer industries were in contracting industries, so we were going to lose large employers. At the same time, we were likely to find it harder to attract businesses. We set off on an agenda looking at what the business community might identify as priorities to make the region more economically competitive. I will say, when we looked at this, the region was mostly the 25 towns that we consider to be the primary economic area. When we looked at our infrastructure report, particularly transportation, we think of a region in a much larger term, even though we're not going to be able to influence a lot of that. But when we looked at this plan, we immediately set off on the issue of the aging population and workforce, and got on to a multi-year project with housing, trying to promote more housing diversity on the South Shore. And as we've been doing that for several years, most of the complaints we heard about housing and concerns we heard from residents about housing, able to really rebut, dismiss, and refute. The areas that we thought were legitimate with housing development in the suburbs that pose a concern were over infrastructure, primarily water, wastewater, but also transportation. So our next phase, while we're continuing to work on housing, the next phase of our work was where our infrastructure priorities from the business perspective should be. We identified actually water, wastewater as probably being the largest threat to the region's future. This is not a water group, so I'm not going to get into that too much. But with transportation, that's a very traditional role for chambers to be involved with. And this chamber has been very active with that for decades, primarily focused on the Boston commute and the residential experience for people here getting in and out of Boston. The report that we have actually shifts that focus, or suggests the chamber needs a different focus. Instead of looking predominantly at the Boston commute, which is, when you come down to it, helping our local residents get to jobs in Boston, we want to start shifting our focus to a more intra-regional or intra-regional south of Boston focus, which is more about getting workforce from outside the area to jobs on the South Shore or south of Boston. We think that's going to be a stronger initiative, harder to accomplish, but a stronger goal for economic development for the area. How do we move workforce to jobs here in order to help local businesses grow and attract more businesses? Not always easy for a lot of reasons. As our co-chair of the committee, we formed a transportation committee with experts in transportation to help us. Janice Bergeron was the co-chair, along with former Braintree Mayor Joe Sullivan, who was former chairman of the House Transportation Committee, or Joint Transportation Committee, and then some people on the call who are experts in transportation, including Mike Lambert from BAT and Charlie from OCPC, and we appreciate their input on this. But getting into issues of short run, last mile, reverse commute becomes challenging when you look at it. Simple things like a reverse commute from Boston, while it sounds kind of logical if people are moving down into the South Shore and there are lots of employees, people who may be looking for jobs in the cities, how do you get them to take the mass transit routes, the red line of the commuter rail down here? Not as simple as getting residents up there, because once you get to the end point here, getting that last mile to the jobs that may be more dispersed in the area is much tougher than trying to figure out the the commuter line schedule going into Boston or adjusting for some of that movement into the city. It's not as easy figuring movement out of the city or against traditional suburban rush hour. But what we're calling for in our report is that the business community needs to pay more attention to the inter-regional communication, transportation systems to promote that economic growth. One of the things we've done in our report that ties in a little bit with OCPC's typical work actually moves us into land use planning and municipal assistance. Because we think with the high cost of infrastructure, whether it's transportation or water, wastewater, the way you build a stronger case for those investments by the government and the stronger return you get from those investments, we think will be accentuated if you can concentrate some of the geographic area where you're going to make those investments, either in some new roads or water, wastewater systems. So we looked at areas, we've started to identify areas that we think have very high potential for more growth, that is both business and residential growth. And almost all of those cross town lines. And that's not too coincidental, because we think that you're going to get a lot more bang out of the buck if towns are able to look at not just what's happening in their borders, but what's happening around them and where there is opportunity to expand growth in areas with neighboring towns. That's often a hard thing for local officials to do because they're being paid the political pressure, the review on their work is what can happen in their town. Being a regional business group, we obviously have a slightly different perspective. It isn't just town by town, but what can happen in the region. So our agenda that we've laid out for ourselves, our chamber and our Economic Development Corp, not only looks at what we do for transportation in the region, but how do you tie that into those land development opportunities, those land use strategies, and work with individual towns, not so much for technical assistance, but for public political support, because we have found with housing and some of our other economic development work, town leadership is usually very good on both of those issues in most communities. The problem is that, as some of you involved with this can appreciate, under siege and stretched thin. Great professional leadership in the top ranks, but often not a lot of support underneath to help you do what you're trying to do with economic development. And often there are a lot of internal challenges you have with other boards, committees, volunteer groups, and of course, town meetings. That's where we think the business community can help collaborate and work with many towns who are looking at this. Now, we lay out an agenda for ourselves, but we don't have a lot of solutions on how we get there. So this is going to be a work in progress. When you're looking at things like short distance runs, looking at public-private partnerships on investment, looking at reverse commuting, trying to figure out how towns are going to deal with things like the new MBTA housing requirement. These are all things that we're going to have to figure out as we go along. Fortunately, our co-chair has a lot of experience in this. So I'm going to turn it over to Janice Bergeron, who co-chaired this with us, to maybe give her perspectives on some of the trends that are happening with private investment in transportation, short-run solutions, things other than building the new superhighways or trying to build new rail lines, and things that we might start looking at as a business community for the regional economy. So Janice?
Okay, well, thanks, Peter, and it's nice to see everybody on this call. So my name, like Peter said, is Janice Bergeron, and I'm president of R&D Consultants, and R&D is all about connecting transportation to development and providing economic opportunities to communities as well as the region. And so we've been working, me personally, on a number of different projects, including the Green Line Extension, South Coast Rail, a lot of private developments. And it's all about where you can find opportunities to connect both transportation to residential and commercial development. And a lot of that has to do with zoning and how you plan for that future for economic development. And so, what I've realized over the past like 10 to 15 years is if you plan for it and you come up with goals, like 1 to 3 goals in a community or a region, and really hit those goals hard, that's the best way to really come up with a real strategy that's achievable. And I would have to say, I'm a huge fan of both City of Somerville and the City of Brockton for how they've been doing this, because they've really planned for their future growth. And that was so important. And because of that, they've seen quite a lot of success. As part of that, I think one of the things, I totally agree with what Peter said, is that the communities are stretched thin, right? So you have really from the top, like planning department or economic development department, you have your higher echelons, but it's really getting the support to push a project forward seems to be where, we could strengthen in order to get that kind of momentum for economic development. So with that being said, I think there's a lot of public-private partnership opportunities that are out there. I see more and more of that both here in Massachusetts as well as other states. There's a number of projects that the MBTA and the developers as well as communities are taking on from a transit-oriented development standpoint, where each party plays a part and puts money into a project. The T in the state, as you all know, have doubled down on transit-oriented development. It makes so much sense. But it traditionally is around those communities that already have transit, right? So, when it comes to, Abington, anything on the Old Colony lines and or South Coast Rail lines, you have a lot of opportunities there, but it comes down to scheduling. And how do you get, the MBTA or the state to think differently about schedules in short runs and off-peak runs? And so I think that is one opportunity. But another opportunity too is really thinking about the last mile. I mean, the last mile is so important, and that's where so many communities, north and south of Boston, are struggling with. And having electric vehicles such as Circuit or, other type of industries that come in and provide those short run miles or short run transportation alternatives is where I think we have to really start thinking about moving forward. I would say the regional transit authorities like that, who was instrumental in moving people in and around the community or the area, is so important. And I think there'll be more emphasis on that, on the regional transit authorities moving forward. Buses are so important, but as well as other potentially electric vehicles, for whether it's vans or cars or sharing, is something that we really need to think about. And there's private funds out there to help support that, especially if you're in an opportunity zone. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for making a difference and providing momentum for that type of mindset and to help us really improve economic development in the South Shore. Hope I covered everything, Peter. But I think the biggest key takeaway with all of this is really setting up your zoning to be flexible in each community to allow economic development, transit-oriented development. Industrial on the South Shore is huge. It's not like I have to, I'm sure you've all seen it. It's the biggest demand that's out there. And developers that we're dealing with and working with very closely, they're all looking, they said, if there's no transit, we're really not interested in developing housing or commercial mixed use spaces. So that's what we're hearing from the private side. So it's really, how do we help the developers come into a community to provide that flexibility? With that, I don't know if anybody has any questions for anything that, you know, was in the report or what Peter and I just chatted about, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions for Janice or Peter?
Just want to say, from Bat's point of view, a significant thank you to South Shore Chamber and to Janice for this great work. It really highlights some of the key issues that transit and our host communities face. We're trying to do everything we can to meet some of those needs that were highlighted there. And I was going to give this part of my update, but we're close to, we have a contract signed to launch micro transit in Rockland. So that'll be in the next month or so. We have our order placed for electric buses. So we're trying to sort of experiment in those areas and serve our communities best as we can. I do agree that one of the key aspects here is the zoning issue that right now we face suburbs that were just not constructed to support transit. A good example for this, from a JTC point of view, is the Route 18 corridor. It's a very busy commercial corridor, but it's not designed to support transit. It's designed to support private use vehicles going up and down the road. So it's really the zoning that can help bring about a new form, both in terms of our urban areas, but also even our suburban areas that can help support transit and help remove some of the over-reliance on private vehicles that we currently face that choke our roadways and don't really allow for equitable movement of people and goods.
Noreen,
Yes,
I have a comment.
yes.
Or
Go ahead,
suggestion. Okay, thank you. I can remember back in Whitman many years ago where we used to have 2 and 3 taxi companies in the town of Whitman, but of course they went away because the business went away. Having our T station approximately almost a mile from the center of town, if people are working, we'll say living in Plymouth and coming to Whitman to work, and they need to get from the train station to the center of town, this might be a good opportunity for private industry. I know they have Uber. I've never used it, so I don't know how dependable they are, but to bring back the town taxi again, or either that or have small buses like the ones that Gatra has and have them stationed at each T station, and maybe have a particular time when commuters are busy, like, if they have to be to work at 9 o'clock in the morning. So if the train stops in Whitman Center, we'll say at 8 o'clock. So the bus stays there at 8 o'clock and you catch the bus and go wherever in town, the route that this would go. That can be done in a lot of different towns, especially Abington, which is so large, having, that train station and moving people around that are working in Abington and living in another area. And the same way we'll say with Plymouth. the train station being by the old cottage and, or in Kingston, and you have a smaller bus, move people to where they need to get to, so they don't have to walk or get a cab or whatever. Just have a dependable, timely bus route so they know when to be there. Just a suggestion.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you, Daniel, on that. Plymouth is also doing, they have small, like their vans, electric vehicles that they're using in their downtown to get people to and from their different parts of town of Plymouth, as well as to the train station. So I think having like those micro transit options are so important. And there's funds available, public and private, to help with that. And the cost for that is so much cheaper than relying on, let's say, a bigger agency like the MBTA.
Right.
So there's, yeah, so it just, it makes sense in so many different, for so many different reasons. But also like what BAT's doing is so important. And I think, following that model, I think is going to be important for the region just moving forward, especially when it comes to the South Coast Rail project. I think you'll see down in New Bedford and Fall River wanting to get up to Brockton and other areas, those residents. And so how would that happen? Again, getting to kind of that reverse commute and so forth. So I think we're going to see a lot of change on the South Shore moving forward. I think Route 24 is a real problem. At some point we have to recognize that corridor needs an upgrade. It's the most dangerous corridor in, I think, Massachusetts, or one of the top 3. And, looking at that also, because that kind of stymies us also to expand on the South Shore. So just something to think about.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any comments?
No, just thank Peter and Janice for coming in, their time. I communicated to both of them privately that it's a great report. It's very informative. It's beautifully presented, and I encourage it, if you haven't looked at it yet, take the time to look at it and peruse through it. And as it's kind of a segue to what we're doing here with our 2050 long range plan. As we look out towards 2050, where the demographics of the South Shore are going to shift dramatically, and it's going to be an aging population, and the how do we serve that population? There's going to be a big demand on things like microtransit, but is that possible without significant changes in zoning? And so these are all factors that we're looking at over the next 25 years, and couple that with people on the opposite end of the age spectrum, younger people who we're seeing a trend with younger people. They don't want to own cars. They want the transit options and the active transportation options like bicycling routes and better pedestrian connections. Just so I think there's going to be a big demand for this, and these are all questions, issues that we're looking at for the next 25 years and beyond.
I should share, since all of you are in transportation or in some way or another involved in economic development, I'll share our interpretation of a recent report that came out same time as our infrastructure report, but Mass Taxpayers Foundation issued a report the same week, heeding the warning, a little bit of doom and gloom about the state's economic competitiveness, mostly over tax policy, but they had a few interesting nuggets in there on population trends. And the one that I found most interesting that I think you'll all appreciate is last year, the state sort of reversed its trajectory for the first time in, I think, 5 or 6 years. We had been gaining population in Massachusetts until last year. Massachusetts lost about 46,000 residents. And that wasn't just to warm weather states. The other New England states gained population last year. Massachusetts lost. That was partly because of, well, a lot of factors would go into it. But one of the takeaways that they had was the high cost of living in doing business here.
Yeah.
What I found really interesting in that report, the little silver lining, is that while the state was losing population, the South Shore, Southeastern Mass area gained population. Now, those weren't big numbers, but it was going against the current, which is something that I thought was worth noting for our leadership, that we have an opportunity on the South Shore and Southeastern Mass to compete a little bit better now for that workforce. We did not have a breakdown of age in that report, but I've got to assume that it's a lot of people coming out of Boston, because Boston was the biggest loser. Those are going to be younger people. And I think it goes to show one of the findings or projections in our report, or two that were particularly relevant, I think, for everyone on the call, is that we expect our region to continue to grow as people leave the city. And there's a sort of a good news, bad news for most of our towns. We think that normal commuter trade-off of how much commuting pain are you willing to take for the house value you're willing to afford, that trade-off of 30 to 60 minutes, we think gets expanded, because people will more people may have options to work in those Boston jobs for fewer than 5 days a week, which means that they're willing to maybe commute a little further out. Now, that opens up a lot of new opportunity for people who may not be on major transportation spokes to Boston. And that's good news. It's generally good news, we think, for Southeastern Mass, where people might travel out of Boston, start looking at us more than they did Metro West or the North Shore in prior decades. We think they may be looking more here because of house values, and they're willing to endure a little more commuter pain if they don't have to go in as often. The bad news for all of us, even though there's opportunity there, the bad news is that for the very same reasons, they're able to look further out and maybe even beyond this state, so that we're going to have to be even more competitive in attracting that talent that is going to be leaving Boston, mostly because they're aging into the mid-30s and thinking about families and moving out. The suburbs are going to have to be more competitive and aggressive in trying to attract those people. Short of it is, last year, we saw some interesting demographic threads with movement that were encouraging for our areas. And hopefully we can keep that up the next few years, even if Massachusetts continues to lose population.
Thank you, Peter. Are there any further comments or questions? Thank you both so much,
Thank you.
Peter and Janice. Great presentation. Gives us a lot to think about. And as soon as you go off the air, we'll probably have more questions. So, because that's usually how it works.
You actually better have more answers, because we're going to be looking to the planning agencies and things like that to help figure out how do we implement this, because there's got to be a wider intersection.
Exactly. Yeah.
Private business and municipal planning around land use and infrastructure investment. So we'll be coming to you for the answers.
Right.
So-
I
so-
think that, as you alluded to earlier, it's back to the basics. It's dealing, with the municipalities. And some of the municipalities, do have the professional help and some of them don't. So I think it's all going to be collaboration, and communicating with each other in order to meet these goals. So the planners will be busy.
Great.
Thank
Thanks,
you all
Norman.
very
Always.
much.
Well, thank you so much. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Okay, bye-bye.
I'm gonna move on now to item number 4. And that would be Sean, and that's the minutes of, I'm sorry, item number 4 is communications.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. The first item in the communications packet is resources for the bipartisan infrastructure law. There are multiple items. The first is updated overview slides, which can be found by clicking on the link in the staff report. A new BIL Be Involved and in the Know handout, which will be attached also in this staff report. There's also a competitive grant online table, which captures discretionary programs that the Federal Highway implements. There is a new library of recorded webinars for the BIL, which can be found in the hyperlink for this item. New transportation funding opportunities for tribal nations brochure, a DOT navigator tool, an updated Federal Highway BIL technical assistance / local support webpage. And if you are interested in any of these resources, please click on the links in the description. The next item is a Safe Routes to School infrastructure launch information session. It will be held October 3rd at 2 p.m. For more information and to register, please click on the link for this item. The next is an announcement for the Baker-Polito administration announcing $16.4 million in Shared Streets and Spaces Programs Awards. And at the town of Abington received just under $200,000 to install ADA compliant curb ramps, a crosswalk, rapid rectangular flashing beacons, speed feedback signs, and reconstruct a portion of a sidewalk along Thicket Street and Old Randolph Street. The town of Bridgewater received $200,000 even to replace, widen, and upgrade 3 sidewalks on town-owned streets that run through Bridgewater State University's campus and serve as an important pedestrian connection to the Bridgewater commuter rail station. The Brockton Area Transit Authority received a little over $163,000 to significantly improve their 3rd busiest bus stop, which is the Westgate Mall, by tripling the designated area for buses with an extendable, accessible platform and installing shelters, wayfinding signs, and bike racks. The town of Plymouth received just under $200,000 with the desire to reduce vehicular speeds and improve pedestrian safety through expanded curbs, more rapid rectangular flashing beacons, improved signage visibility, and realigned and shortened crosswalks at 2 of their densely populated locations near Plymouth schools. And the following cities and
Really?
towns. I'm sorry, did somebody say something?
No, I'm reading the one for Avon and I'm saying, what, they got that? And we appropriate it in our town meeting. Okay.
Yes, so these next awards were awarded for the purchase of equipment in this funding round. Town of Avon received $50,000 for snow removal equipment for pedestrian and bicycle facilities. The city of Brockton received $50,000 for the same equipment. The town of Plymouth received just under $50,000 for speed feedback and messaging signs, as well as an additional $28,000 for pedestrian activated warning devices and crossing signals. And that looks like those are all of the awards in the OCPC region. If anybody would like more information about the Shared Streets and Spaces program, you can click on the hyperlink in this staff report.
Yeah.
And that is communications.
Dan, did you have any questions or comments?
No, I just happened to notice about 50,000 was awarded to buy some sidewalk snow removal. And we
Uh-huh.
just purchased one of those for our town at our last annual town meeting.
Mhm.
And I just happened to notice that. And then my next statement will be to talk to the DPW and say, why aren't you applying for them? I know we've applied for a lot of safe streets and things like that, because we've done a couple of streets in Whitman. We'll be doing the center of town coming up very shortly, but
Right.
you can always ask for more.
There you go. Thank you. Any other comments or questions for Sean? All right, I'm gonna move on to the next item, which is BAT. Mike or Glenn?
Thank you, Chair. First, as always, touch on ridership, which remains consistent dating back to really March at about 65 to 75% of pre-COVID numbers. Although we did have our biggest week since quarantine at the end of July. So that was exciting. But really September will be the key. That'll be the important ridership report that I give this group, as to whether or not downtown Boston is coming back in terms of ridership and office-based activity. You heard me mention earlier that we've signed a contract to provide Rockland microtransit. And to Dan Savucci's good point, so the service is designed to cover all of the town of Rockland, but then we've added carve-outs that include the VA hospital and the BAT Center and the Abington commuter rail station. So people will be able to order a vehicle to meet the commuter rail. As you just heard from Sean, we received a grant and to expand our stop at Westgate Mall. We have an agreement signed with Westgate Mall as of this morning, and we have a contractor on board. So we expect that work to be able to start in the next couple of weeks. And that'll be both a great safety improvement and great comfort, customer comfort improvement. We have our order placed for 5 electric vehicles, as you've heard previously. Progress there is mostly centered around working with National Grid to make sure that we have the correct infrastructure in place to provide adequate charging for those vehicles. And last but not least, the state budget this year includes $2.5 million statewide for low or no fare service. So stay tuned for that, but I think we will have a pretty exciting program to present to you at the next meeting.
Good.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it. I had a question. You have electric buses online now, Mike?
We don't have any yet, no.
Not yet. These will be your first electric that will be online, the ones that are coming in?
Correct. Yep, we have installed charging stations for private vehicles, both in our garage and at our office. And we have a plug-in hybrid that we use to get around town here. So we've started to put our foot into the arena. But now it'll be a big leap to get to with our first 5 electric buses.
Right. Have they done any research? I mean, because of the type of weather conditions we have in the wintertime here and how cold it gets, is there any research on that as far as, would you have any trouble starting these vehicles or things of that nature? Like I know in other states, they don't.
We hope that starting will be okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a concern. We know that there will be reduced distance and capacity due to both the weather, both the conditions and the need to heat the buses. So both those combine to reduce battery capacity. So that's part of we're going to do we'll do studies ahead of time to see sort of what, how many buses we need to cover our routes, given capacities. One thing is that basically every year battery capacity changes and improves.
Right.
And so when we decide to actually transition our fleet, which is still probably 2 years away,
right,
the technology will be different from what it is today. But that's sort of the thinking of this first 5 vehicles is that as much study as we can do, it can't replace real life experience. Both, it matters the topography of your routes, it matters how long you're trying to run, it matters how often you stop and start. So all those things we'll use these buses to gather firsthand data in terms of how an electric bus performs in Brockton with our climate. And that will help determine our future decision making.
Yeah, something that I have been thinking about. And also, as I read a lot of planning material across the US, there's a lot of monies out there. You mentioned there's a bill for 2.5 million for low or no fare service. A lot of cities are implementing those programs. I read about Seattle, and a lot of California towns are doing that. And they find it's working out really well. Some of them are reduced fares and some of them are no fares. They're like pilot programs, and they seem to be working out pretty well. If a program like that just introduces people just to take public transportation, I think that they've met their goal, just adding to the service. So I think it's great that we're thinking about that too.
Thank you much. Yeah, I think from BAT's point of view, and hopefully from our customer point of view, our top priority is providing reliable service. So, even if it's free but not reliable, or free but it's running late, or you're missing trips, that doesn't help the person who's trying to get to work or get home from work.
No, right.
So we start with that premise, and then we first try to provide service that's affordable, comfortable, safe. But you're right, nothing can compare to offering free service in terms of introducing new customers, and it creates efficiencies from an operational point of view because you don't have to worry about collecting fares, and really just makes using transit at a spur of the moment much easier. We do have mobile ticketing, as Glenn mentioned last time, and we have been promoting that, and that does allow, at least for someone walking down the street, to even if they didn't have a cash in their pocket or a Charlie card, they could still use their mobile. They could use their phone to hop on, but that doesn't compare to obviously, a free fare system. So it's something that we certainly are going to. You'll see our proposal next month, but tie it into support for local businesses as well.
All right, thank you. Anyone?
Noreen, just a quick thing. We do have Mary Ellen DeVry as the new GATRA administrator. I know GATRA has electric buses on their fleet. Mary, do you have any input on any of the aspects of having an electric fleet?
Sure. So I can say that, believe it or not, the hot weather also affects the battery, as we learned. During that heat wave, we noticed performance dropped. So it's something that we're definitely keeping an eye on. We have 6 buses running right now. So by this time next year, we'll have a full year's worth of an understanding of where we stand with issues such as the battery. But I do know that, I know we all worry about the cold, and we have been planning for that. But we were a bit surprised to find out that extreme heat also does have an impact on the battery life. So these are all things that we share and try and make it so that everybody can be prepared as they bring their fleets on board.
Good to know. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, Noreen, I have a question. Yes, as far as electric buses, some of the schools are looking to purchase. I'm on the South Shore Tech School Committee, and we have propane buses, but some of the other towns and cities in Massachusetts were advocating for electric school buses at our conference down the Cape that we'll be going to again this year. I'd like, when you have a full report of the goods and bads of electric buses, I think you ought to share that so that schools or the state doesn't invest in something that may be failing in 2 or 3 years. So it's just something because I'm not a big fan of electric buses at this time until I learn more. I like the propane buses, at least it takes us away. It's cheaper and it gets us away from using fossil fuels. But electric buses, kind of leery on that, on whether or not it's worth it or not, trying to move a piece of machinery. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Any other questions or comments? Alrighty, we are gonna move to GATRA, and that was item 5B. Any reports?
Do we usually give, or I'm not sure what we usually cover here in this, Sean. I guess I would defer to you on what
Yeah,
you would
so
like me to bring.
yeah, because I usually reach out to someone at Getra. I've contacted, so I used to call Joanne LaFerrara. She was the
Yes.
Director of Customer Relations, I believe.
Yep.
I have not been notified of her replacement. I called her number and extension yesterday. Have not heard back. So if I can try to figure out who her replacement is for next month's meeting. But if you have any public information that in terms of GATRA that you would like to share, by all means.
Okay, so I will send you, I've restructured kind of everything over here over the past couple of weeks. So I will get you a new contact person that will be able to give you that information. I do want to hit on the fact that GATRA is actually operating 4 micro transit services right now. We have one for the towns of Franklin, Foxborough, Norfolk, and Rentham. We have a separate GATRA Go system that is Mansfield and Foxborough. Then we have GATRA Go for the town of Pembroke. And then we have a GATRA Go in Plymouth, South Plymouth. So that's separate from our Plymouth PAL service that we also operate there. We have had the microtransit running since COVID, and we are still gathering data on kind of the impact that has and how the cost works for that. But we have diversified into that field. I think that's probably all I have for now, but I will work with you, Sean, on making sure we get what you need for this group in the future.
Very good. Thank you very much. I'll email you after the meeting, and we can talk more about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Ellen. Any questions or comments? Alrighty, I'm gonna move on to Sean, South Coast Rail Project. Any update?
Yeah, just a quick update. For the month of August, there were various project activities that were continued, such as the fencing installation along the railroad right of way in 8 communities along the secondary lines for Fall River and Middleborough. There was 24-hour track work that was done in Assonet, Berkeley, Lakeville, Middleborough, Raynham, and Taunton. 24-hour crossing work in the town of Freetown, as well as the city of New Bedford. There was some track switch work done in the town of Freetown. There was a detour in Fall River for bridge work over the railroad. And then there was also road work on Route 105, both daytime and nighttime, as well as daytime road work on Route 28, all in the town of Middleborough, and continued improvements at the CSX rail yard in the town of Middleborough. And if anybody is interested in receiving the weekly email updates for South Coast Rail, you can click on the hyperlink in the staff report, fill in your contact information, and receive those weekly emails.
Thank you, Sean. Any questions of Sean at this time? Hearing none, I'm gonna move forward to item 6, which is old business, the FFY 2022 to 2026 TIP implementation program. And that is Bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sean, if you just want to fast forward, see the first blue highlight. Okay, thank you. So first update I have is for the project in FFY 24, the Route 123 at Plymouth Street project in Brockton, being in communication with the design engineer and MassDOT. So the design engineer has been informed that the project will have to, the 25% design will have to be updated with new data collection and analysis, and that it should the project should still stay in 2024. It might push out potential advertisements to the 4th quarter of that year, but it should stay in that program year. But stay tuned on that. Next, similarly in 2025, also in Brockton, the project for intersection improvements at at Lyman Grove and Summer Street. Replacement of the Grove Street Bridge that also needs new analysis. So the design engineer is working on that. And lastly, my last update in this report is the Duxbury Bridge replacement for the Route 3 northbound and southbound bridges over Franklin Street. There will be a design public hearing held on October 6th, 2022. And I've been speaking with MassDOT Office of Outreach, and they a flyer for that should be available soon. And when that is available, I will send it out to the Joint Transportation Committee, as well as we'll advertise it on our social media and our website. And that concludes my update for this current tip. If anyone has any questions, happy to answer them.
Any comments? Thank you, Bill. I'm gonna move forward to 7, new business, item B, which is the 2023 to 2027 tip development schedule. And Bill?
Yep. Thank you, Madam Chair. So sticking with the tip fund, so we're moving into the development stage for the next update of our tip, which will be the FFY 2023 to 2027 time range. And this is the development schedule on your in your report. So their schedule will be largely the same as it was this past go around. So more towards more later this fall. So starting in November through January, I'll be reaching out to communities and soliciting projects from working with communities, and also, you know, BAT and MassDOT. The next, you know, if I go to the next page, Sean. So that the first substantial milestone in development of this tip will come in March, with, you know, through consultation with the communities and, you know, tip day and all that fun. By March, we will have a preferred set of projects for the MPO. Typically, we like to present at least a couple different scenarios and let the MPO choose their preferred scenario, as we did this past year. I think we presented 2 scenarios, and the MPO selected what their preference was, and that was what we ran with. And by April, the MPO will review that and release it to comment period. And by May, we're looking at an endorsed tip and for the region, and then gets kicked over to the state and feds, and then eventually works into the state step. So that's the schedule. I am the new tip manager going forward, so I'll be contacting all of you and working closely with you, and I look forward to it.
Congratulations, Bill.
Thank you, Nora.
Great job. Any questions, comments? Alrighty, I'm gonna move forward under item 7 to the Old Colony 2050 Long Range Transportation Plan, the goals and objectives of the plan.
Yes, ma'am. So I did introduce this to the committee last month, and
Yes.
you know, so just to kind of review, so these are the primary goals of our plan going forward. We're currently still developing objectives for each of these primary goals on how we'll achieve these goals, and as well as determining performance measures and performance targets. And that's a continuing collaborative process with our state partners at MassDOT. There's a subcommittee going, it's been held. We had a meeting yesterday talking about PM3, which is performance targets for basically highway reliability, things like travel delay. So that process is going on, but the primary goals of this plan, safety, obviously, reduce the number, both the number and rate of serious injuries and fatalities on the transportation network for both motorized users and vulnerable, what we call vulnerable users. So pedestrians, bicyclists, people in assistance, mobility assistance devices. So, then going forward, so the next one, transparency and equity, making sure that the planning process is fully transparent and equitable, and everyone has equal access and to the process, and that's something we continually strive for. Economic vitality, it's kind of, it's nice connection to what Peter and Janice spoke about earlier, making sure that the infrastructure system that we're planning and maintaining and also building upon supports a thriving local economy going forward. And that, I think we're seeing some shift in that economy. And so that's one of the challenges looking towards 2050. Security, making sure that the secure transportation system, accessibility, is fully accessible to all persons, regardless of personal level of mobility or financial means. Next. Clean environment. So making sure that, what's being built isn't harming the environment, and, ultimately, the ultimate goal would be improving the environment. So, we just talked about going to electric buses. So it's not only not harming the environment, it's actually taking fossil fuel burning vehicles off the roadway, replacing them with electric vehicles, and leaving a much cleaner environment than what existed before. Resiliency, state of good repair. So maintaining the system, you're keeping highway surfaces state of good repair, keeping bridges in state of good repair, very important. And then efficiency. So and a lot of our three primary performance target areas are PM1, which is safety. So that would fall under that first safety goal. PM2, that's state of good repair. So that's looking like high, pavement conditions index, and then efficiency, which is the meeting I had yesterday, talking about how reliable the system is. So that's how those performance targets fit into these goals, and each of these goals will have an individual set of objectives under each one. Some of those objectives will be carryover from previous plans, and some of them will be new. I don't know if anyone has any questions on any of that.
Any comments? Thank you so much, Bill, for repeating that. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Yep. Item number 8, which is other business. A is community local technical assistance studies.
Yeah. So the town of Hanover, they requested that we do a traffic study for Route 139 at Grove Street. They recently implemented some traffic control changes at that intersection. I think they made Grove Street right in only and right out only. So we'll conduct a traffic studies to see how that traffic control change has impacted the surrounding area. Certainly there'll be some impact as drivers have to find an alternative around those control restrictions. So that'll be a good project. Data collection will occur this month while school's in session, and the analysis will probably take a couple weeks, so we should anticipate a fairly quick turnaround on that, and we're looking forward to working with our Hanover partners on that. And then after that, the other projects that we're currently working on are listed in your staff report. Any questions?
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
I'm going to move on to item 8B, which is staff reviews on ENFs, EIRs, and MPCs. Would that be Kyle?
It will actually be me, Madam Chair. Kyle is not in attendance today.
Alrighty. Alrighty, Sean.
Okay, so there are 2 certificates, both in the town of Easton. The first is Easton Warehouse. The certificate states that this project does not require an environmental impact report. And the other is Owl Ridge Estates. The certificate states that this project does require a single environmental impact report. Oh, and that is it. Nice and quick.
Thank you. Any questions of Sean? I'm hearing none. I'm going to move forward to item 8C, which is the regional concerns and local transportation issues. And I'll open up the floor if anyone has any questions or comments. Ooh, quiet group today. Alrighty, then I'm going to move on to item 9 for adjournment. Do I have a motion on the floor?
I'll motion.
So
Dan
moved,
Sullivan.
Second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I
Alrighty, thank you so much. Thank you, OCP staff, as usual. Great presentations and good information for all of us. And I will see you next.
Madam Chair,
Yes. Go ahead, John.
so somebody has their hand raised. If you
Oh,
could please
I didn't
unmute
see that.
yourself.
I did not see that.
It's listed as Hanson Highway. If you can hear us, please unmute yourself.
I don't know if that's Jameson Shave.
Is that you, Jameson? Speak up.
Maybe it was an accident.
Could very well have been.
I've done that before.
Absolutely.
It's like, no, I didn't raise my hand.
Well, they took it down now.
Yeah, so I
Alright.
think we may be fine.
All right. I didn't even see that. How come? I didn't see everyone, that's why. All right.
We're all set, right?
All set?
I believe so.
Sorry about
All
that.
right, thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye,
All right,
everyone.
thank you.
Thanks.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Have a good Labor Day, everyone.
Yes.
Bye,
you
Don.
too.
You too.
Okay, thank you all.